Hey everybody, this is Ed Kaiser for the Results Driven Podcast. And today, in lieu of having another guest on this podcast, thought I'd go back to an old concept we've explored in the past, doing a bit of a mailbag episode where I go through and answer some questions, and go over some issues that have come across my desk. And so well, maybe we'll call this, instead of a frequently asked questions, an FAQ, we'll call it an RAQ, a recently asked questions. These are all questions that actually came across my desk this past weekend. Just thought it was sort of an interesting snapshot of an opportunity to share some common questions or questions that I've received recently and go over them for the benefit of all of our listening audience, for our results agents, and maybe any other sales executives out there who want to think about joining Results someday. Because I am here to answer questions as they come up, and even including over the weekends and in the evenings. Whenever agents need my help, I'm here to answer those questions, and even in podcast form. So let's get into it. Ed, I have never knowingly listed a home that was not insured. I am to list a metro home for an estate, so the seller is deceased. The insurance company lapsed when the seller died. Can I list a property if it's uninsured? Anything else I should know? The short answer is that, this can happen predominantly with an estate. It's not necessarily a law that someone is required to maintain property insurance, but it certainly is required by most mortgages or all mortgages, and it certainly is advisable that someone maintain property and casualty insurance on their property in case something happened. But there's nothing inherently illegal or wrong with listing a property for sale that doesn't have insurance. Matter of fact, that's in like an estate situation. The reason why they're probably putting it up for sale is the fact that owning real estate even after someone deceases is an ongoing expense. It's an ongoing liability, and that's the reason why selling a property and getting rid of it is the best way to solve for that problem. So listing it as uninsured is not an issue. It's not a disclosure or anything like that. But it is important to talk to the property owner and make sure, is it possible to reinstitute the insurance, because there is risk associated with listing a property for sale. If someone were to visit the home and have an accident, to fall down the stairs or something else, that is what the property insurance is there for, is to protect against that risk. And so if it is possible to get that property insurance reinstated and covered, especially prior to placing it on the market, that would certainly be advisable, but I'm not going to sit here and say it's required. All right, next question. So Ed, with all these new rules changing with the MLS payouts and the NAR settlements and everything else, what happened to procuring cause? This is something that I've talked about in the past, but the general idea is that procuring cause no longer exists, or not at least within the framework of MLS compensation. Procuring cause and these arbitrations that would occur sometimes where different folks would be arguing, different realtors would be arguing over who earned that commission, who gets paid that MLS commission. Procuring cause stopped on August 14th. It stopped when those rules and the MLS cooperative compensation went away. Now, the agent who gets paid is the agent who had a buyer rep agreement or other written agreement for the commission, and then is able to put that written agreement to use by putting it into the terms of the purchase agreement, where the seller agrees to pay the compensation, or into another agreement between brokers, the cooperative broker type agreements, where the listing broker agrees to pay the buyer's broker. But by and large, the concept of procuring cause, at least in terms of the rules from the MLS and commission, no longer is in effect. There may be some situations where that phrase still pops up from time to time. Builders sometimes like to use the phrase procuring cause, but they're sort of co-opting that expression into their business. At the end of the day, the contracts are what matter. What's in your buyer rep contract, what's in the purchase agreement or the new construction contract in terms of who is paying what commission, that is ultimately what's legally binding. The idea of procuring cause, to a great extent, if not entirely, is going the way of the dinosaur. Speaking of the new rules, Ed, if someone calls on my listing and wants to see it, do I need to have them sign a touring agreement? The answer is yes. even if it's your own listing, they do still have to sign that touring agreement. The only exception is an open house. An open house is the one exception where a touring agreement isn't required. And there's actually a conversation that I had with someone, and there was a follow-up to this question, and it said, well, what if it's a virtual tour? What if they're out-of-state buyers? And the answer is you still need to have them sign a touring agreement, even if it's a virtual showing, even if they're not physically there. If you're showing them a property, even if it's through FaceTime, they have to sign that touring agreement. This was an interesting one. Ed, so if a neighborhood has rules, HOA type rules, covenant conditions and restrictions recorded against the property, but the HOA never actually launches the association, are the rules enforceable, or is there any way to enforce the covenants recorded by the developer? This one's interesting. This actually brings me back to one of the things I used to do as a lawyer many, many years ago before it came to results. But there was a time way back, during the Great Recession when the bottom fell of the market, and there were a lot of condos, developments, HOAs that were being built by a developer, and then the developer went down under, ran out of money, market fell apart, and then you had these partially developed HOAs, a few houses in what was supposed to be eventually a fully developed community, but things happened, things stalled out. But the reality is those rules that exist were recorded against each individual parcel. A declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions is a legal document that is used to create the rules of an HOA. And that legal document, the declaration, is recorded against each individual parcel in that development. And so those rules do affect every parcel in that development. So, for example, if the covenants and conditions in an association says you may not erect a fence along the front of your property, which is a kind of a common one, that rule is enforceable not just by the HOA, but by any other parcel owners, any other owners in that association has the right to enforce that rule if someone were to put up a fence and violate that rule. Now, it's certainly ideal if the HOA exists and is there to address those issues with the homeowners, deal with them so that individual homeowners don't have to. But in this situation, if for some reason an HOA never really got off the ground, or what we sometimes hear is these HOAs just stop paying attention. They just stop caring. And the community just kind of gives up or says, forget about it. Even those derelict associations, those rules are still enforceable, and it is within the rights of any parcel owner who has the benefit of those rules to enforce them. They could potentially sue the non-compliant parcel owner as a private cause of action. Additionally, they may spin up the association and then use that as an arm to enforce the rule. So the short answer is, if there are HOA rules in the Declaration of Covenants and Conditions and Restrictions, they are technically binding, even if there isn't currently an enforcement arm in effect in that community at the time. Another question. This one came in actually via voicemail, but rather than play it, I'll just tell you the gist of it. The listing agent had a listing for sale. The buyer was a VA buyer, so they were approved for a VA loan. They had written a language into their offer that says that the VA buyer would bring additional cash to close if the appraisal was low. Now, as we all know, that is a common strategy in purchase agreements for buyers, but with VA buyers and FHA buyers in particular, there's specific statutory language that requires to be applied to VA buyers or FHA buyers, and it's the VA or FHA escape clause. Those escape clauses apply under federal statute to any VA buyer or FHA buyer, and the escape clause says, which it's in the purchase agreements, it says that if the appraisal is low, that the VA buyer or the FHA buyer has the right, unfettered right, to walk away without penalty. So the question was, the conversation we had was, which prevails? Does the VA buyer saying that they'll bring extra cash to closing, does that language apply? Or does the fact that it is a VA buyer and the VA escape clause exists in the contract, which prevails? And the answer is always that the escape clause prevails. No matter what's in the contract, if the VA buyer or FHA buyer has a low appraisal, even if they said that they would bring additional cash to close, if they change their mind and say, never mind, it's a low appraisal, I want to walk away, they have every right to walk away, keep their earnest money, and not be punished for that. So in that situation, VA buyer, FHA buyer, the offer containing language that they would bring additional cash to close is potentially aspirational, but it's not legally binding. Another question, Ed, what is a durable power of attorney, and how is that different to other kinds of power of attorneys? I've heard about a durable power of attorney. What does that mean? And a durable power of attorney is a part of a strategy to create a legal document that would exist in the event that someone needs to step in on the behalf of the grantor of the power of attorney to the recipient of it. A power of attorney is a legal document that delegates the authority for someone to act legally or financially on behalf of another person. So if I'm taking a trip to Antarctica and I'm not going to be around, I can give power of attorney to someone that I would trust to manage my legal affairs and financial affairs after I'm gone. That would be a durable power of attorney. Now, if the alternative, I think what was asked in this question, is the other kinds of power of attorney, there can also be a limited power of attorney. And a limited power of attorney is simply a power of attorney that instead of is being broad and can be basically applicable to any different type of legal matter, whether that's relating to real estate or banking or signing contracts or, signing me up for Netflix or whatever someone may do over a general power of attorney. A limited power of attorney is simply a delegation of the legal authority to act on someone's behalf that is more limited in scope. So, for example, if I was leaving to Antarctica on a trip midway through a real estate transaction, which is actually something that happened once, believe it or not, in my experience in this industry, that person could grant a limited power of attorney to an individual just to sign real estate related documents. It would not be applicable to other legal matters such as dealing with my financial accounts or dealing with my personal other affairs. It would only be limited to a specific type of transaction, a real estate transaction. It could even be limited to a specific address for that real estate transaction. So the idea between a durable general power of attorney is big picture granting all discretion to the power of attorney to act on someone's behalf versus a limited power of attorney, which is limited in scope and applicability to a particular type of transaction or a particular specific need. All right, last one. Went through these kind of quick, so hopefully this is a nice short episode for everyone, but this one maybe is something that we might hear more about. So this is going to be something that is unfolding as we again, navigate this new world with the new NAR rules. And the question was, Ed, lenders and some title companies are asking me for copies of my buyer rep agreements after closing. Is that normal? And the answer is no, it's not normal because no one's ever had to do that before. Buyer rep agreements, those are our private contracts with our customers, our clients, so they actually belong and we owe fiduciary duties to our clients, the buyers who sign our buyer rep agreements. Now, the reason we're seeing this occasionally come up, it's not across the board, but some lenders, some closing companies, some title companies, they are grappling with these new NAR rules, and specifically the rule that prohibits a broker from collecting or receiving more compensation than what was in their buyer rep agreement. And so some lenders and title companies are questioning how far do they have to, or how far do they have to push, or are they responsible in any way for enforcing those rules and ensuring that the buyer brokers are not collecting more compensation than they are supposed to. I would argue they're not, but at the same point, I'm not able to control how other lenders or title companies control their business. So occasionally we are seeing some mortgage companies or outside title companies that are making these requesting that the buyer agent or the broker provide proof in the form of the buyer rep agreement that they are not overcharging or receiving more commission than what they're entitled to. To that, I would immediately respond and say it's our job as the buyer's agent and the broker to ensure that our contracts are in alignment and we're not receiving more compensation than necessary, and we will make sure that that occurs. The contracts themselves do not belong to the lenders. They don't belong to the title company. I'm not going to say it's none of their business, but also for them to request it does not mean that we must, as the agent, automatically provide that information. If it's required for the buyer to, let's just say, get a loan or something else like that, we can certainly provide the buyer rep contract if that is something that our buyer consents to. If our buyer gives us the blessing to share the terms of that contract, we can. I would also say that if the buyer wants to share that with their lender, the buyer would, of course, be free to do so. But the request right now seems to be coming after closing, after the transaction is already completed. And so at this point today, until things have evolved or changed, if that request comes in from a lender or title company that says, can you please provide a copy of your representation agreement for this transaction that recently closed, the answer is respectfully, that's not my responsibility. But if you would like to relay that request to the buyers, they can consent to my releasing that information or not. Let's monitor this situation as it unfolds. Again, I think this is part of a growing pain within the general real estate industry at large about how these different institutions are understanding the rules and then trying to comply with them. But sometimes we see some overreactions to these things and potentially overstepping their bounds or stepping outside of where they ought to keep their focus. And in this situation, it's not a legal requirement, at least at this time, to share the terms of a buyer representation contract, a private contract between us and our clients, with an outside third party. So with that information, I'll keep your questions coming in to myself and the RE/MAX executive team. We are, and your office and regional managers, we are always here and happy to answer those questions. This was a little bit of a rapid fire podcast, but I just wanted to kind of share with you all a little glimpse into my weekend and why I love my job is I get to help answer these questions and respond to our sales executives and help you all conduct your business and provide the great service that you do to our sales executives. So with that, I say, let's get out there and keep working.